Ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the end of the year, the end of 2025. I don't know how your year went. Maybe you were happy, you were not happy with certain things. I know there's always that little bit of a balance. What about the political year 2025? Now, I could talk to the Premier or I could talk to an opposition leader. I go to my favorite choice when it comes to politics, Ruth Forrest, our MLC for Murchison. Ruth, welcome.
Oh, it's lovely to chat to you again, Wade, after what's been a very interesting year indeed.
I'm sure it was. Is this now going to be the last interview of the year for you, or you think you're going to have to
Yeah,
do?
that's the plan, Wade. I'm just finishing up in the office today and then having time with family and until early January, then I'll be back working around the electorate and then back into committee work at the beginning of February. But then of course, over for the show in March, and I'll be spending 4 or 5 days over there to get
Oh,
away from the place.
is
Well,
that a
this
lot?
place to come to there.
Is that a lot of difference between family and politicians?
I'm not sure. No, I love spending time with the family, and it's really lovely to have all my children coming home. There's three that live on the mainland in Melbourne and one in Tassie, so it'd be nice that they're all home at the same time, and all the little cousins will get to meet for the first time. There's some quite new ones amongst them, so that'll be really lovely. And it is a lovely time, but I do appreciate that Christmas is not so happy for everyone. So we have to recognise that not everyone has those same privileges, but it really is a special time for a lot of people, and it certainly is a special time for us.
Yeah. Reflect back on 25. You've been doing a lot of work, like you say, in committees and in the Legislative Council, and how would you classify the political Tasmanian year 2025? What stands out? What went wrong? What went right?
I think there's probably two words that really describe the whole year in many respects, and that's disruption and division, which is really sad. I mean, disruption can be a positive thing, but in this case, this year we had another early election, which was very disrupting. As members of the community may be aware, when an election is called, Parliament stops sitting, all the committee work stops, and then you're just sort of in a holding pattern, waiting for that lower house election to occur. The Legislative Council members keep working, but we can't do the committee work because Parliament is prorogued, and so notionally we can't continue that work. So it does create, particularly when you're not expecting an election, holds a lot of that work up. So once the election's been had, then we have to re-establish all the committees and then get back into the work. And sometimes, if it's been a period of time, which it was this year, you actually need to go back out to some of the witnesses for information or evidence on an inquiry, because things have changed during that period. So I guess if we talk about what led to the election, it was the budget mostly that was in very bad shape. It's still in bad shape. It's the one that was delivered in November was very similar to the one that was basically led to the no confidence motion and the fall of the Parliament at that stage, and that budget showed increasing levels of debt, increasing requirements of interest payments that take money away from services. And then that's the disruption that occurred. The division occurred partly through that process. Obviously, there's great division when you have another early election. But the stadium debate was probably, in my time, in over 20 years in Parliament, the most divisive issue that I've dealt with. We've had divisive issues. In fact, it probably was on a par with when Taswind were on King Island, and I don't remember how many years ago that was, Wade, but that absolutely divided the community of King Island. It was very localised to King Island, obviously. We saw families being divided. We had very different points of view. We had people coming to the island from the mainland Australia and even from mainland Tasmania, expressing their points of view, which really had very little to do with them directly. And so we have and that was very divisive. And I saw some really sad outcomes there, with families being quite divided on that issue. This was the same with the stadium. It was the whole of Tasmania, where there are very strong views on both sides. Those who absolutely, desperately, strongly support it, no matter what the cost, just build it, they'll come, or that sort of approach. We'll lose the team without it. And then there was others who were so dead set against it. They'd almost do anything to stop it. And so there was, and that could be in the same family or the same community. So it was very divisive, and I found that a really difficult time, because there were very few people in the middle. Most people were on one side or the other. And whatever way you go with something like that, there's going to be a whole heap of our community. And it was, up in the northwest and north, it was less in favour of the stadium. Down the south, it was closer to 50-50 toward the end, in certain parts of the south. But in any event, there was certainly no more than 50-50 at best for either side.
But Ruth, when you talk about in the middle, nobody was in the middle. Wasn't it like you're against this stadium or you're in favour? Was there a middle?
There was a few people who didn't really have that much interest in football generally. Those who have an interest in football, which is, the northwest of Tasmania particularly, is a very strong football culture. We look at King Island, you've got 3 teams that still continue. We've got the famous gravel oval on the west coast, which indicates that really strong connection to AFL rules. We've had some amazing AFL players come out of the northwest of Tasmania and continue to. And there's more coming down from north and south now than have been in the past. But the people who support footy, and which is the majority of the population, in my view, they were very polarised. They agreed with the team, absolutely, but did not want the stadium. They didn't want the cost of it. They didn't think it should be in Hobart. There was lots of reasons why they didn't support it, but they were dead set against it. And there were those from right across the state, though fewer numbers up in the north and northwest, who absolutely wanted the stadium. They saw it was the only way to get the team, but they wanted the stadium regardless. They thought it'd be a huge boon for the state. And that it's been a really difficult challenge to try and find some common ground for a lot of those people. There are a few who really don't have very much interest, but those tended to go toward the no side because they could see the cost and were concerned about the state of our budget, and what it meant for funding available to fund other services and things that we need besides the football stadium.
Would you have been, well, put it this way, if the budget would have been in a surplus, the future of Tasmania would look very bright, would you then have been in favour of this whole setup, the stadium, the team, and the way it is presented?
Look, I think I've been clear in my position from the outset. I do recognise that we do need a new facility, a new, much better, more undercover, more services around a stadium for not only AFL but for other purposes as well. So yeah, I do support a stadium. The problem was that particular site was really problematic because of the impact on the cenotaph, which does, once you build a big stadium in front of that, you destroy the sight lines and you cannot remediate against that. That was very clear. And that site was chosen after the Second World War. First one was up after the First World War. It had its just last week. It was its 100th anniversary of its first initial construction, and it was built there at the request, particularly of the widows whose husbands had gone off to war and not returned, to be a site where they could see it pretty much from around all of Sullivan's Cove, most of Hobart, and also directly from St George's Church, which is in Battery Point, which was a really significant place of worship and comfort for them. And so there was that. There's also the maritime heritage in that area with the old buildings around like the wharves and the Henry Jones Art Hotel, that sort of place that has very distinct maritime heritage, as well as the dock area there. So I think whilst the AFL said that you've signed the deal, and was the Premier who offered that site, was the Premier who offered, or said we'll put a roof on it. The former Premier had offered a roof. He offered a different site. But I firmly believe that we could have come to a more negotiated position if we'd been willing to pull back and do that. Um, and if the budget had been in a better position, we would have been able to remove that concern about the cost impacting on the service delivery because of the interest repayments that this level of debt requires.
At a time, there was a time, back in time, history, Melbourne and Sydney were fighting about who should be the capital city, and we ended up with Canberra. Should we had had the same maybe with a stadium somewhere in the middle of Tasmania, or
I once looked at what was the geographic centre of Tasmania. I think it might be Erebor when you take in the islands. So that's in the middle of nowhere. With all due respect to the little town of Erebor, but there are many people who think it should have been Launceston because it is much more accessible to people from the north and northwest. And even from Hobart in the south, it's no further to drive up that way than it is for Launceston people to drive to Hobart. And we do know the parochialism that is very strong in Tasmania. But I do understand that our team does need to be based in the south of the state. I understand that. That's been a more difficult position to perhaps gain support from my community because it is so far away. And people still say to me here on the northwest that it's cheaper and it will be cheaper and easier for them to get on a plane in Wynyard to go to Melbourne. Because the accommodation in Hobart will be so tight. Even if new hotels are built, they're not going to build a whole heap new hotels because you've got to keep them full, but on more than 7 days a year. Okay, otherwise you just can't afford to build them. And in Melbourne, you can get a variety of accommodation options. If you want to stay somewhere cheap, a bit out of the city, you can do that and then use a train or tram to get into the city. So there are far more options. And you can probably go to 2 games, maybe see a show, do some shopping, other things as well. So there'll still be an element of that, but there'll still be people who will drive down from the northwest to go to a footy match or cricket or whatever is on down in Hobart from time to time, particularly those who are really, really keen fans.
you've written and expressed a lot about the budget this year, I think more than ever in your political
Yeah.
career. Um, what can this government do, or what should it do to bring the budget back in the surplus? Have you got a solution for it?
I've been talking, as you say, Wade, I have been talking about this for quite a long time. And the longer we've left it, the harder it has become. And so it is going to take a long time. I can't predict exactly how long it will take to turn this budget around. I think we do need to have some conversations with the federal government around some sort of assistance. Now, that's not a positive thing necessarily because when you're asking for assistance, when we're not doing the job ourselves of looking at what are our revenue bases, have we done the best we can to raise our own revenues? And we should be looking at that. We absolutely need to look at that and look at, I mean, the government now finally, after they were almost pushed into it, despite a commitment in the 2024 and 2025 election, introduce a short stay levy. And that's a levy that falls on people that come into the state or people who are travelling around the state but using an Airbnb or short stay property. That will raise an amount of money, but that is to be, as I understand it, hypothecated back into housing, which is where it should go. I mean, I'm not saying that's a problem, but that only fixes or assists one area. So we do need to look much more broadly. But I'm sure if the federal government does need to bail us out in some way or provide additional financial support, it'll be on their terms, not ours. And if we haven't been doing what we can do to look at our own tax base, our own other sources of revenue, not necessarily taxes, but other ways we can bring revenue into the state, then I imagine that would not be something that the federal government would be too impressed with.
Is it possible to reduce so we could raise taxes and whatever we do, but can we look inside, internal, and make changes that would reduce a lot of costs in the state? Looking at
Oh,
certain
absolutely,
departments,
Wade.
maybe,
Yeah.
and
Well, one of the biggest levers we can pull is our expenditure lever. That's the lever or the expenditure is what has grown out of all proportion almost. Now, what's interesting is during the main COVID years, like the 2020, 21, 22 budget years, when we knew we had to pump money into particularly the health system and education to help children to learn at home, and other like public safety and biosecurity. There was a whole range of areas we needed to put money into during that period, and the budget was boosted to assist that. The interesting thing about those 2 years was that the budget that was allocated was adequate pretty much, and we kept pretty much within the budget, which is what you'd expect and what you want. Okay, and there was additional money put into the budget for contingency, if you like, and the Public Accounts Committee actually went through all of that to make sure it was spent on the purpose it was intended for. And then after that, the following 3 years after that, the spending has just increased and continued on that trajectory with no evidence for a need. We knew COVID created that need, but since then, the government haven't pulled back. They haven't reassessed what they're spending on what. The public service is blown out. I don't know how many people that are in the media team in the government now, but there's enough for a football team, according to some people. And I just don't think, not that you're going to save the budget with getting rid of a few spin doctors, but we need to look at every area, and those people that are there to promote the government and make them look good or better, perhaps we need fewer of those, and we need to have a really good look at all departments. Now, the problem with health is we keep spending more and more and more in health because demand is there, but there is, and if you look at the Department of Health's annual report, they're not meeting their performance targets. So whilst we're spending more and more money, we're not actually getting better outcomes. And so we need to look at that and understand why is that. And we've heard from the federal government and from from the Tasmanian government too, the challenge with older people in hospital taking up beds that should be in aged care. So we need to work together on those things as well. But we need to look at all those departments and see where the problems are and fix the problems so that the money we have got, we can spend more wisely. But while we continue to spend upwards of $600-700 million a year on interest repayments, that is money that can't go into actual service delivery. That's money to service a debt that has grown extraordinarily over the last 2 or 3 years.
So you think when we talk again next year, December 26th, that the situation would have changed a little bit budget-wise, or are we still on the same trajectory?
Well, there's a couple of interesting things happening next year, Wade. The 2026 Fiscal Sustainability Report will be out. I understand that's probably around February, March. That's a Treasury report that's required under the Charter of Budget Responsibility Act. And that's a report that's done every 5 years by Treasury without any interference from the Treasurer or government. And they've done previous ones. They've done 3 previous ones. They redid an extra one after the Public Accounts Committee had an inquiry into that report and found there were perhaps some errors in their modelling. But anyway, so there's been the last one was 2019. This one that was pre-COVID. This one will be after COVID, obviously in 2026. And this one coming up will obviously outline the seriousness of the situation and what the last ones have done and looked at, high expenditure, low revenue scenarios, or low revenue, low expenditure. And so look at how our budget will look in the forward years, like many years hence, through different strategies, I guess, that the government should employ. The important thing to note is those other previous reports have all said we're heading in a direction that's not good. This is, in the term of this government, and the sooner you act, the less difficult the task is. Now, they haven't acted, and so basically we're exactly where the worst case scenario predicted we would be in those reports. So I imagine that report won't be glowing. It'll probably tell us, what we know, but we'll be able to see the actual scale of it. Then we'll have the the revised estimates report, and we know there's a bit of extra GST just come in, so that may not look as bad as it might have done. But then the budget that we'll have in the middle of the year will be critical. Now, if the budget is anything like the one we've just seen, which is so-called interim budget, it won't be believable because there's so much money missed out of that in the forward estimates. There were so many things that weren't funded. So I think if the Treasurer is true to his word and says he's ready and up for the task, we're going to see some serious cuts. And I don't know where they'll be, but I hope they're in the places where there's excess and where there's people who perhaps are doing jobs that don't actually deliver services and improve the outcomes for Tasmanians more directly, and that we also look at that revenue side as well.
Now, we're going to simplify it now because we're on a small island and you represent our island in the electorate of Murchison when it comes to the Legislative Council. Look back at King Island. What have we achieved? What could be better? It's like, hey, federal money gave us a new hub for all to enjoy. There's things happening. Your vision on King Island when it comes to 2025.
2025 has been a pretty interesting time for King Island. We had the issue with the cheese factory, and it was good to see that be purchased and put back into operation. And I wish the new owners every success there. I think it's a really iconic King Island product. And yes, we know that the government provided some financial support there, and that's a good thing to do with something that's so critical to the island. We've seen the investment in the Shearlight mine. I do think we need to be really careful that when we're investing in these businesses, we're doing it from a business that will continue to return benefit to Tasmania and to King Island as well, obviously through employment. We've seen tourism's been a challenge, and we've seen the issue with reduced flights to King Island and the capacity issue that creates. It makes it harder for locals to get a seat on a flight when they actually need to get on and off the island for medical treatment, for education, for all sorts of things. And that's an area that is a real challenge. And I think that's probably a space the government need to insert themselves more into, to ensure that King Island is not held back through lack of capacity to get onto the island. We've seen the expansion of the Gulf as a really important sector in the tourism, and then the hub, as you said, Wade, that was a welcome amount of money to provide a centre for the island. And I hope it's well utilised. I think it has huge potential to be that. But it does open up other opportunities for other tourism opportunities on the island. But there's challenges because of the smallness of the island and the cost of getting on and off. And then dare we talk about freight and the
Well,
Bassine
we
line.
have
Is it
freight
coming this week, Wade,
equalisation
or not?
well, we have freight
Yeah.
equalisation that we still, of course, we don't know. That's all in now. Yeah, researching and what can be done. I think when you mentioned flights, is that if an airline doesn't want to grow with the island, it makes life very difficult. And I think, to be honest, that we then have to look at federal money. Hey, because improve the runway, the airport, and enable other airlines to come in with even slightly bigger planes and grow with the island, to grow tourism and name it. Now, dare I say and use the word ambulance hub?
Yes. That's one that should have been not even on the radar because it should have been built.
Should have been
It should have
finished.
been built, Wade. It should have been built and it should have been staffed. And here we are. We're still waiting. I regularly ask for updates on this, as you would be aware. I'm assured that the money is secure. It's not going away. They're still. I don't know whether the word is still recruiting or looking at recruitment of, which is probably a more accurate term, the community paramedics to support the island. because we need the new ambulance station first, apparently. And we do, because we can't have people working out of really substandard environment if we're going to have them working on the island in that capacity. So I understand that a DA has or is being lodged. I hope it has been lodged. I'm not sure how long council will take to assess that, but I'm assured that the site's been selected, the money's available, the DA's in or about to go in. I still don't know what the timeline is, but we know every delay costs money. The amount of money that was committed to often may not be enough now because of the delays, and we know that the cost of building escalates significantly. So what my job will be is to make sure that we don't see this facility pared back to meet the current budget. But we see that it built according to the specifications that are required, and that may mean that it needs a top-up in funding to deliver that. Now, I know we've got the challenge with the budget. I've got both of those things in my head, but this is critical infrastructure. This is not a luxury item. And so we do need to look at how do we make sure these things happen, and we don't we're not finding ourselves forced to reduce the scale of a project or take some of the things out that are necessary to deliver it, because it is critical. It's been critical for a long time.
What are you hoping for 2026 politically?
In a broad sense?
Oh, in broad, King Island, name it. What are you hoping and aiming for?
Yeah, well, I'll start with King Island. I think for King Island, it'd be really great to see some of these challenges with access on and off the island, whether it be for people or for goods and freight and things like that, to be far less problematic. I think if those things were more seamless and more reliable, and there was adequate capacity, some of these other challenges wouldn't be there. And so that's kind of chipping away at those sort of things. I think that will then, assist the tourism potential of the island, assist getting workers on that you need for specialist roles and things like that. So there's that. And then for Tasmania as a whole, and that applies for King Island as well, I think that there does need to be really serious action taken on the state budget. We need to look at what we're delivering, how and where, and to look at making sure that what we do spend money on is in the best interest of the state as a whole. Even the Coordinator General said when he appeared before the Public Accounts Committee that the studying, for example, would provide very little, if any, benefit to the northwest of the state, direct benefit, and limited indirect benefit. So that'll be even further removed for King Island. And so we need to be sure that where we are investing large amounts of public money, that we're doing in a way that actually benefits the vast majority of Tasmanians, not just a select few.
I think what we're going to spend our money on now, Ruth, is, I guess, Christmas presents. I thank you very much for your time, and wish you a Merry Christmas, and I'm sure we'll talk again in the new year.
No, I really appreciate the opportunities to chat to you, Wade, and chat to the community of King Island. As I said, I will be over in the beginning of March for a few days for the show and just to enjoy the island. And it's always lovely just to get away from this little island to that even smaller island, because it's just a really beautiful place. So I look forward to catching up with people over there and catching up with you, of course. It's always great to chat. So I wish you a really happy Christmas too. And I don't know if you get a break, you probably don't, but let's hope you're not having to do any emergency broadcasting.